You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing with your host, Connor Byrne.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Don't forget to rate or review this episode wherever you are listening or watching. It really helps us reach and build on this amazing community of engaged marketers just like you. Truly is one thing you can do to help us grow. If you are interested in getting involved with That's What I Call Marketing, our sponsorship kit is now available over on our website. That's what I call marketing.com/sponsor. Well, on to today's show, and today's guest is Colin Westcott Pitt, who's the Global Chief Brand Officer with Glanbia Performance Nutrition. And today we are talking about building a $1 billion global brand. Colin has a background working in global alcohol brands, and we chat about that and about his time working on Dos Equis, which at the time had the brilliant, most interesting man in the world campaign that I'm sure many of you remember. So we chat about that and how the field of alcohol marketing has changed and evolved. 8 years ago, Colin moved to Glanbia. Now, Glanbia is an Irish global nutrition group with operations in 32 countries. It has leading market positions in sports nutrition, cheese, dairy ingredients, speciality non-dairy ingredients, and vitamin and mineral premixes. Glanbia products are sold or distributed in over 130 countries. And in their performance nutrition, they have a portfolio of about 9 brands like SlimFast and the hugely successful Optimum Nutrition, which Glanbia acquired in 2008, and it achieved over 1.1 billion in revenue in 2023. And Glanbia is probably the giant global company that many people don't know about. So it's great to have Colin here today talking about the successes of the brands they have, particularly Optimum Nutrition. Through our conversation, Colin highlights key moments of success for Optimum Nutrition, notably its expansion into online and broader retail distribution, alongside its unwavering commitment to product quality. We discussed the new partnership with McLaren Formula 1, and actually when we had recorded this, McLaren had just won the Grand Prix in, I think, Miami with Lando Norris, so it was great. And that partnership focuses on nutrition of both drivers and pit crews. It's kind of really interesting hearing about that. We delve into a topic that I have a keen interest in, and it's something that Diplomat helps brands figure out, and that is the complexities of managing a global brand that has a presence in 90 countries. Colin explains the importance of the strategic balance between maintaining a consistent brand framework and allowing local markets to tailor their messaging to resonate with regional customers. He underscores the vital role of investing in local talent and nurturing a collaborative culture. In the episode, we also address the challenges of measuring marketing effectiveness, the potential of AI to revolutionize content creation and media planning, the importance of aligning strategies with business goals to ensure they contribute to revenue growth and profitability. And we round off with advice for aspiring marketers, focusing on the need for cross-functional exposure, active listening, and a strong understanding of consumer behavior. Well, so much to get into, so let's get into today's episode with Colin Westcott Pitt.
Today's show is supported by the Indie List, the leader in providing you with easy access to hundreds of highly experienced marketers quickly and cost-effectively. Visit theindielist.ie to speak to the Indie List team today.
Are you facing the maze of global expansion? Diplomat introduces the diplomacy model, a cost-effective, innovative approach to navigating the complexities of your brand's presence in international markets. Visit diplomat.agency.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Colin, thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing.
Thanks, Connor.
Well, listen, I want to start. You haven't done a lot of these, so I don't think a lot of people maybe know your story, but it's a fascinating career and background you've had. You spent an awful lot of time working on alcohol brands before where you are now, but I'd love to hear about that background, how you ended up there and the path that you took through many global alcohol brands.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess I started off in sales. That was the first thing I did straight out of sort of university, and I got a job selling beer to publicans on the south coast of England. Right. And after doing that for a little while, which was an incredible experience and really sort of formative in my sort of learning of how to deal with people, you know, I'd always wanted to move into marketing. So I, within the same company, moved into the marketing department there. And then it was a bit more focused on trade marketing than brand marketing. And then just a few opportunities sort of opened up in different parts of the world with different companies. And I really enjoyed that industry. It was a fantastic place to cut your teeth. The brewers and the distillers are the heroes of the operation. There's always, as you can imagine, a fairly big focus on communications and experiences. So it was a fantastic experience for me.
I did want to ask you about one particular brand and campaign that you worked on, which was Dos Equis and the most interesting man in the world. And I remember I was in an agency at the time and we were like fawning over that. Like we were just like, this is amazing. Like it was just phenomenal work. I'd love to hear a bit about that, kind of how it came back, and it must have had just a huge impact for that brand.
Oh, it definitely did. I remember when I first sort of started working on it, the brief from my boss was very clear, which was basically don't mess it up. The campaign had been born a few years before I came onto it. The credit's due there. For those of you that may not be familiar with it, Dos Equis is one of the brands in the Heineken USA portfolio. It was a really fast-growing Mexican beer. And they had this campaign called The Most Interesting Man in the World. It basically featured a character who was kind of in his 70s, lived a really, colourful life, I guess you would say. And we brought that character to life. And it was really built on the insight that sort of young people didn't want to be stuck in a conversation with nothing to say and to feel a bit boring. So we just sort of gave them a bit of an inspiration to have stories to tell. And I mean, it was quite groundbreaking really in the industry at the time to have a 70-year-old sort of personification of the brand. And the final line that he says in all of the ads was, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. And that line in itself was really quite a brave line. When I talked to the people that sort of created the campaign, well, that was a big deal to actually say, I prefer and I don't all. So it was a good lesson for me in terms of just being bold and brave and having conviction for something and keeping things, as authentic or real as they can be. So it was a great campaign, and the brand enjoyed fantastic growth. And to your point, the employees that we had at Heineken USA, the distributors, they all got so excited when the next ad was coming out.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of David Taylor and John Goldstone and the Brand Gym, and they talk about fresh consistency. And that to me is a wonderful example of fresh consistency, because it kept going and going. You didn't break it. It kept finding a new way of expressing itself and in a really fresh way. That's hard as well, fresh consistency, because the temptation is to actually say, well, we've done it, let's go do something else.
No, definitely. And that temptation happened, every year we would sit down and say, what have we learned from the last year? What are we going to do differently? And the conversations were always about protecting, really understanding what is at the core of that campaign. And a lot of it was really incredible writing. The amount of lines that were written around that, and it was very clear about what lines work, what lines don't. But it did come back to the consistency of delivery with a few subtle changes every year in terms of where we wanted to take the campaign. Underneath the bonnet of it, there's lots of conversations that happen, and they're not always easy ones, and ones that you want to sort of make sure you do keep that consistency and don't change things for change's sake.
Yeah, and I imagine, I know Heineken well in some regards, but I imagine there's a lot of data that go with those conversations as well. Like there's the gut, the feel, but the science of it. And I was thinking, as I was looking back kind of through that period in maybe the alcohol brands and that side of things before you moved to Glanbia, which we'll get onto, but that industry changed a lot during that period, even from ability to advertise, kind of what you were allowed to advertise, then the advent of kind of more of the craft beers. Like it was a phenomenal change in that industry. Like when you reflect on that, do you look back and kind of think about how that changed and how you were able to adapt to those changes?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of changes. I mean, I think obviously there was consumers were beginning to sort of move from the quantity to the quality element. So that premiumization definitely came in. And so when I was working for Heineken mostly in the States, we were a fairly small share, and we were in the import sector. So that was sort of helpful. And then, the real explosion really of zero alcohol offerings for consumers was a big part of it. So there were a lot of changes there. The emergence of the social platforms was happening at that point. So we were trying to work that out as well. But some of the core tenets of the industry remain the same, which was a really relentless focus on product and quality, making sure consumers, that was the best marketing that anybody can do, is a great product. Heineken were particularly committed, as a number of the drinks sort of brands, to great communications and advertising, but also experiences, real consumer experiences, whether it be sports, whether it be music, and being present in those really amazing moments in consumers' lives, I think is remained consistent, over time.
And you touched on it there, the importance of then the insight as well, to get to that great communications and that great marketing, which Heineken, some of those other brands you worked on were so good. And then, so about 8 years ago, nearly 8 years ago now, you moved to Glanbia. Maybe we just start with, for anyone who doesn't know who Glanbia, people in Ireland probably do know Glanbia, but people outside of the country may not know who Glanbia is. Just tell me a bit about the Glanbia business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're an Irish-based business. We have two main business units. One is the consumer side, which I work in. It's called Glanbia Performance Nutrition. And then we have an ingredient side as well, Glanbia Nutritionals. We have our history is back in in the southeast of Ireland in sort of co-op dairy days. We've evolved a fair bit since then. On the GPN side, we have a portfolio of nutrition brands. The biggest is Optimum Nutrition, but we also have ESN, which is a storied legacy sports nutrition brand. And then we have other brands, Isopure, also in the sort of lifestyle nutrition. The listeners probably familiar with Slim Fast, which are on the weight management side. The majority of our business is in the US, but we have a strong presence in a lot of international markets, US, UK, China, India, and some great people on the ground in all of those countries. So it's a real global business, and one that with a renewed interest from consumers in the role of nutrition is something that's really in the sweet spot.
And a phenomenal kind of Irish success, as you say, where it started to where it is now. Like it's phenomenal. We got into a bit of that, but how did you find then that move from alcohol to performance nutrition? Like, I guess they are very different, but then probably the consumer insight may be central to the success of your work. But I'd love to hear about how you adapted to that change.
Sure. Well, it wasn't an easy decision, I can tell you, because the drinks business is a fantastic one and the people there are wonderful. But, I'd always been fairly interested in sport. So when I got the call and just really got to know Glanbia, I was working in Amsterdam at the time. I didn't have too much familiarity with Glanbia, but as I got to know the people and the ambition of the business and what they were trying to do, it was just a fantastic opportunity. So in terms of differences and changes, it's definitely a different industry. It was much more of an emerging, smaller sort of industry, in terms of sort of mainstream. It was quite specialty at the time, but with, I think everybody felt that there was a real opportunity for the category to grow and then as well as the brands to grow. So I think that's very different. What is the same though is that you're still trying to connect consumers with the brands that that you have, and some of the, the basic principles of how you do that, remain the same. And, hopefully you can sort of apply some of that learning to a different category and start an impact that way.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because you kind of sometimes hear and see companies become very focused on, we need somebody with this category experience or expertise, and I can see why sometimes that. And actually I think alcohol is one of those where you kind of see a lot of that. If people don't have it, they tend not to get roles in alcohol. But so it's interesting then to move completely outside of what had been core for you, but then being able to say, well, actually a huge amount of these principles of marketing and brand growth remain the same. It's about understanding, the differences and really truly understanding what consumers need is going to be very different to an alcohol brand, 100%.
Yeah. And I think, we have a program at Glanbia called the Sports Nutrition School. So everybody that joins the company goes on this school. It's a full week-long immersion. It's in person, and you get to visit the factories. You get to go and do workouts and understand how fitness works. You get to understand how nutrition works. So very quickly, you get a really good baseline understanding of exactly how our products work. What there's a lot of myths in the industry that, we try and sort of be the trusted sort of education source for a lot of these things. So we try to make sure that anybody that comes into our business is really knowledgeable and educated on the brands. And I lean on people who've been in the company for way longer than I have for knowledge and understanding and expertise on how everything works.
Yeah, it's like Paul Darcy from Miro had said to me before, that army of experts idea, because you can't be an expert in everything, but like having a good knowledge and then knowing where to turn to for that additional insight. Nutritionists, dietitians, they're people who know their space.
Absolutely. And the other source, of course, is, we kind of call them the super consumers.
Yeah.
So there's so many people that love Optimum Nutrition. They're happy to share with us how they, what they really like about the brand. It's quality, it's the way it mixes really easily. So there's a great source of knowledge from that group as well
Yeah.
that we try and tap into as much as we can.
Nice vocal group, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
it is also a space that has changed. You mentioned a brand like SlimFast, for example, which obviously was huge, probably 80s, 90s, but maybe even longer than that. That idea of how that brand was addressing nutrition has evolved because it now has more products that are less about the shakes, but it's more about additional meals and all that kind of stuff. But, the space has very much changed. And even I think the introduction of some of the drugs we've seen, particularly in the US and that, it's how have you kind of adapted to that? And has it been kind of by bringing on newer products and newer brands to help evolve the offering?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a massive disruption, the emergence of the medications. So, it's fairly early in that journey in terms of consumers taking them up. There's certainly a lot of news and publicity about it, and it's definitely, I think it's here to stay. And I think, the important thing to remember about that particular category is there's so many consumers, whether it be US, UK, wherever, that are looking to manage their weight in a way that really works for them. So, as these medications come online, consumers are looking for things like protein, making sure they've got enough protein, making sure they have enough energy, making sure they've got the right vitamins and minerals. And we think, along with other people in the category, that consumers are going to increasingly be looking for that kind of help with their sort of diets and their nutrition. So we still see it as an opportunity. It might just be in a different way than it's been historically.
Yeah. We need to get onto Optimum Nutrition because it is a phenomenal success story. And I was looking at some of the numbers. It was bought in 2008 by Glanbia, and in 2023 it hit 1.1 billion in revenue, 2x the growth I think of the year before, if I'm correct. So would love to talk to you about it, maybe starting with, I don't know if you were there at the time, but when the brand got bought, what was the prompt for the business to go purchase the brand?
Yeah, so I wasn't here at the time. I'd love to take credit for what's probably one of the best purchases we could imagine, but no. And in fact, a lot of the team that made that acquisition are still with the business now, which I think is, telling in many ways. You talked about consistency before. But yeah, it was the first sort of scale consumer brand acquisition that Glanbia had done. It was about 120 million in revenue at the time. So it's been a nice sort of clip since then. It's not, not a perfect straight line all the way. There's a few sort of bits and pieces on the way, but, it's been a great piece. I think, we talked about consistency before. when the brand has been around for 35 years, which is a long time, not in the alcohol world, but in the sort of sports nutrition world. And it is the established gold standard of sports nutrition. If you walk into any gym in the US and, any sort of real heartland gyms, everybody's heard of the brand, and it's respected for high quality, great mixability. As a product, its gold standard whey is just, is number one. So we had a lot to work with because that's the most important thing, really. We were fortunate at the time. We had a number of, our specialty customers, places like GNC, the Vitamin Shop, and bodybuilding.com that were really passionate about the brand. And, it was a great showcase to go into those stores and see the brand. So we had a lot to work with when we bought the brand. But over time, what we try and do is just to keep some of those tenets front and center. Quality is vitally important for us. And, we own our own production facilities. We make sure that whatever materials come in to produce our products, that we get a sense of the right quality and all those sort of processes. That's absolutely vital. And then our job as the marketing group is to sort of build on top of that and make the most of what our great teams at the factories all prepare for us. So yeah, that's kind of our job.
And it's been, as you said, like a phenomenal growth, maybe not always up and to the right, but it's definitely gone up and to the right. Good CEO, love to see that. What, from your perspective, have you seen as some of the key moments of success along that journey?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it's a moment, but that focus on product has been absolutely fundamental all the way through. And it's probably the first thing we talk about all the time is our product performing? Is our product performing? And that's, we have a pretty wide portfolio of products within the Optimum Nutrition brand. We have protein powders, we have gainers, we have energy products, we have all kinds of things. So it's really important to keep that. We've been consistent with things like the pack design. We have a fairly iconic black and red tub for our gold standard whey. And whenever you walk into a store, it's pretty powerful to see that. I think a couple of key moments would be the expansion of sports nutrition products into online and then into broader distribution in shops. That's happened fairly recently in the last 4 or 5 years at scale. So that's definitely a tipping point. I think the other tipping point is just consumers are way more interested. A bigger range of consumers are way more interested in nutrition now than maybe 10 years ago, where it was down to a really committed group of consumers doing it for weight training and building muscle mass gain.
Yeah, it seemed to kind of get almost like normalized from outside of that. I would have had that view as kind of very much around kind of these, ultra athletes, bodybuilders, that kind of stuff. And how did that come about? Was that did marketing play a role in kind of that communication of kind of making it more accessible and
Yeah, my own take it's a bit of a cultural thing. So we went around the world actually doing research and trying to prepare for our creative platform. And what we found is that everywhere you went, it was India, everybody has a sense that there's potential inside of everyone waiting to be unlocked just a little bit more. So wherever your starting point is, there's a little bit more to be unlocked. And that was quite universal. And consumers are actually looking for ways to make that happen, whether that be getting more exercise, getting more into fitness, getting more sleep, or in our case, getting the right kind of nutrition in there and getting the right amount of protein in your body for the lifestyle that you have is really critical. And that's, whether you're 18, 30, 50, 70. I mean, there's a lot of science out there that says that, protein is really critical. So I think it's been something that's been growing over time. And then I think, where marketing can play a big role, I hope, and I think is that, we can sort of demonstrate that these products are for everyday people with everyday goals. And yes, they are used by elite athletes, and that can be really inspirational. That's a really big part of what we try and do. They can have the same products that our athletes have. And I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, because I've seen, ambassadors and kind of play a big part of kind of, the communication, and a lot of ambassadors that you have. And I think that's really interesting, where sometimes that can be off-putting. But I looked and there's such a range of ambassadors and sports stars and, just across all sorts of disciplines. I thought that was great because doesn't matter what the sport is. I didn't see anyone from darts in there, but I could be wrong. But it doesn't matter what the sport is. There seems to be somebody that you can kind of go, right, I can see myself not being that person, but that's kind of a hero of mine or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. We historically had a lot of athletes in the sort of weightlifting or the bodybuilding sort of world. Over here in Ireland, historically, we've actually worked a lot with Leinster Rugby over the years, and we're still a sponsor of Leinster, which is great. But yeah, around the world, we have soccer, cricket, CrossFit. So there's lots of sports where I think the old world was about muscle mass, but actually lean muscle is a goal for lots of consumers. Athletic performance, whatever level of athletics you're at, is really important. And then we try to reflect that in the choices of the people we work with. And we're very lucky in many ways because a lot of these athletes take our products anyway. They know the importance of the right nutrition. So yeah, we're very fortunate that half the time people are contacting us and say, hey, I use your product.
That's a great position.
We work together.
Great position.
Yeah, we're very fortunate.
And actually, look, while we're on it and talking about ambassadors, recently you signed up with Formula One with the McLaren team, and obviously recently Lando Norris won his very first Grand Prix. Clearly, everything to do with his deal with Optimum Nutrition.
Of course.
Yeah. How did that come about? Because again, I think with all the different types of sports, and then why specifically F1, and then why specifically McLaren, because there's lots of opportunities, I imagine, even within Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, we do work with a lot of different sports. And to be honest, motor racing, Formula One have been on our radar for quite a while. I think over the last year or so, we got to know the McLaren team quite well. There's a few of us at Glanbia who have some sort of Formula One experience. We knew a few of the people there. As we got to know them and what their plans were for the future in terms of getting more podiums and their dedication to human performance. So I think traditionally, motorsport has a lot of the times has been about the car, which obviously is critical. But as we started talking to McLaren, fueling the drivers, getting them the right nutrition, and then really importantly, the pit crew. The McLaren pit crew hold the world record for the fastest pit stop, 1.8 seconds. So actually helping them to, was a story we think is really worth telling. It's just one of those really nice experiences where you sit down in a room with people and you think, oh, we're actually all about the same thing here. And there you talk about consistency of that brand, McLaren, one of the most storied brands in Formula One, incredible backstory, incredible history. Just to be working with them when they're back on the up again is just a real pleasure.
It's
really
incredible. It's kind of interesting to talk about the pit crew as well, because I imagine that probably is where the natural stories obviously will be the drivers, but will you be working kind of around telling stories of the pit crew? Is that going to be part of the plan of communicating the partnership?
So yeah, we see them as, and in fairness, it was an education that McLaren gave us. I mean, we all knew the pit crew is important, but just the dedication, the effort, the time, and honestly, the fitness levels of those guys. They are working incredibly hard, round the clock. They have to be physically really fit, and we can help them a little bit with that. And we certainly see them as sort of the unsung heroes. You'll have seen, that after what happened at the weekend, the camaraderie of the team, Lando diving into the team there. I mean, they're so appreciative of everything that's done. And we think, it's a great story to be able to try and tell that people may not have heard before. So as we build into the partnership, is certainly an area we're keen to look at.
Yeah, it'll be great to see that. And I think obviously things like Drive to Survive have brought them to the fore. Before that, people literally would have seen them for the 4 or 5 seconds of pit stop. So at least now there is some investment. I think people see how invested they are. And it's an incredibly tough job for them because you're on the road. It looks glamorous, and I think Formula One obviously has glamour to it, but it's a tough old gig.
Very much so, and nothing but admiration for them. And what you might not see is actually, they're doing sort of mini workouts during the race. They're literally doing the stretching and everything just to make sure they're absolutely on it for when the car comes into the...
Yeah, I've seen that. Okay, these guys are very committed. You talked there about some of the research and going around the world and getting to insights. I'd love to talk about that because if I'm not mistaken, Optimum Nutrition is it in 90 countries? Right.
Yeah, over.
So that's a lot of countries. And I think it's a very interesting topic because I worked on it at Indeed, and we worked on kind of global markets, and how you then think about the globalization of a brand, because that's where you can scale, but also then understanding the local nuances. Now that gets very difficult when you've got 90 countries. How do you approach that?
I do get asked this a fair bit. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work on sort of local brands, regional brands, and global brands. I was at Heineken, so that was a global brand. And then I worked in some of the African countries where we had sort of regional African brands as well. So I think the first thing you have to do is to, as an organization, you have to decide what's your ambition. And actually saying we want to be a global brand is quite a big statement with implications to it. But that's always been really clear with Optimum, just because it already had a presence and it has a real demand in many different countries where there's gyms, basically, there's people wanting to consume it. So I think, how do you look at it? Well, I think the way we look at it that we've found has worked for us is to really have a very basic framework of what the brand is about, what it stands for. You can call it brand positioning, but, we're the most trusted brand in sports nutrition. That's sort of our one-liner, and wherever we go, that's what we want to be. Along with that, you have basic elements of your DNA, whether it be quality or pioneering and innovation. We always want to be the first people to come out with something new and different in the category. And so you have those sort of core tenets, but then you allow the markets the ability to shape how they want to bring the brand to life in a way that works for them, is relevant for them. So we have a core creative idea, which is there's more of you in you, which is this idea that there's something inside everyone waiting to be unlocked. And then what we do is the markets then we have some assets that markets can use that helps us with economies. And then the markets can do what we call local topspin, which is to take that idea and bring it to life in their market. So, the athletes that are different, each market has, are going to be very different. The portfolio of products under Optimum Nutrition that they bring to life can be very different. The athletes that they use can be very different. So, and the spend and the investment levels are very different. So, there's a core sort of structure, and underneath that, then, it's up to the markets to sort of set their own ambition and bring it to life. And what we find is that there's some brilliant ideas that we've got that go around the world. And if we can bring them all together and share them out with the other markets, then you get some great It's really cool to see things come to life. In India, for example, we've got involved in a movement to bring female athletes to the fore, and that's been really inspirational for employees all around the organisation. And McLaren's another example where, Australia was the first Grand Prix, so we activated there, and all those ideas that worked well there with Oscar Piastri's pastries, and recipes, we can bring that to life. So it really works for us in terms of getting those great ideas, sharing them, and we have a little mantra, stealing with pride.
Yeah,
Nutrition.
It's because it's such an interesting challenge but opportunity, because I think particularly, brands that are maybe starting out on that ambition to try to figure out what is the best approach, because, if you have the centralized, and I think sometimes it depends on the home market, the origination market, where it can certainly color your view of the rest of the world, that you kind of, well, this is how it is. And, I even remember some of the things that you think might have translated from the US into Australia just wouldn't, because culturally it's really, really different. Just even the sense of humor is wildly different. Well, diplomat agency has been set up to try to help companies think about this, but I guess it'd be interesting from your perspective, is that, if you were talking to somebody who's like, right, we've been really successful in our home market, market X, we're thinking now about kind of that internationalization. How would you talk to them about how they approach that? Because again, the efficiencies are going to be in scale, right? Doing it centrally and be able to do more things at scale, but then you can make the missteps by not listening to the markets. I'd love to get your view and what advice you'd have for people.
Yeah, I think it does go down to going to the consumer in that market. If you've got an ambition to grow a brand in a certain market, you've got to get in and talk to consumers, understand how they think about the category, get to those super consumers, understand, their attitudes towards the category and the brands, how they use the category and the brands, really get under that and understand if there's something consistent there. And, I think the skill of if you do have an ambition to be a global brand, the skill of the marketing team is to try and uncover what is universal, because there'll always be differences. There will always be differences of execution and humor. And I think those can be accommodated in communication or athletes or whatever it might be. But you're looking for that universal human truth. And if you feel that there's one there that you can activate against, and that gives your marketing and your communications platform an opportunity to do something sort of special. And it certainly was in the drinks industry. The product is absolutely critical. If you're constantly delivering a high quality product that people trust and believe in, then, a lot of your job is done. So we definitely look at that, and can we get the product to that market in a way that we feel proud of and that works for consumers? Yeah,
it's a fascinating space. And I love the top spin and steal and scale the ideas, which is great. And I guess liberating for marketing teams to know, well, look, we have this global platform because we have a universal insight, but we're able to then figure out a way that's going to connect locally, but also thinking how this could scale into other markets, which is a wonderful lens to have, because sometimes in a country you can be, I only have this part of the pie. It's a big pie, but that opportunity to see your ideas grow.
Yeah, and I think the other thing actually is critical. You just mentioned the people there, but I think that's a big learning for us as well. I mean, just investing in really good people in the markets, which makes a big difference. You can go down the distributor route, which is usually the starting point of how you build something. But as you get to a certain scale, I think there is a decision that is made in terms of, okay, let's get some really good people who understand the market and understand how brands are built as well. And if you get that combination, it can be magical, because what we're really proud of is that great ideas come from anywhere, any country, any market.
I love that, the surprising power of great ideas and not being limited to one individual team. And I think, just to your point about the people, I remember when we were scaling, well, indeed, and we were scaling in Italy, and knowing the moment we now need somebody who knows the market. The person who was working with me, who was based in Dublin, had been doing all the work, and she was like, yeah, now's the time. There's no kind of metric or signal as such. I think there's a bit of gut to that, of knowing this is the right moment.
Very much so, very much so. And you don't always get it right as well. I mean, it's all very well planned and thought through, but learning by doing is such a critical part of this. And many times you'll make mistakes. And, we've found that there's things that we've done maybe 5-6 years ago that weren't right at the time, but actually now they may be right. So, it's just, I don't think you can be too precious about it and, pretend that everything was planned out to the nth degree. There's got to be an element of entrepreneurial, let's give this a go, see what happens and see if it sticks. And if so, great. If not, let's not beat ourselves up about it.
But in a big business, that can be harder to maintain that culture of actually we are open to experimentation and trying things. How do you create that culture on the team?
Well, I think one of the great things about Glanbia Performance Nutrition is we're not an enormous company that you can't have conversations. We have a set of values that we really try and live. Often it's just picking up the phone and having a conversation, or going out to the market and visiting and just talking things through. We have an elephant exercise where if there's an elephant in the room, you bring it out and talk about it. These things are really important because I think we find that the minute it gets into an email conversation, it tends to not. So these sound like really little things, but they're really fundamental. If you're worried about something, you've got a problem, just pick up the phone, and talk it out and see where you get to.
And I know you're right, they do sound like small things, but like it can be so easy to not do them and blame even time zones, but there's always a way of figuring it out and I think also where your point of going to the markets also then that helps build the relationship with the market, so that when the elephant needs to be talked about, like people feel okay, I get it. So there's kind of that balance. I know, and I saw maybe a couple of months ago, CEO kind of going through kind of a review of the annual performance of Glanbia as a whole business. And what became clear to me listening to that was the value he and the company places on marketing and brand actually in particular. And I know there's probably people out there who don't value brand, but like it's clearly a company that does value brand. Has that been a journey, or has that been something that maybe has been just a core belief in the business? I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a core belief in the business. One of the reasons I wanted to join was because that sort of was very obvious from the start. The first meeting I had was we want to grow our brands and we're really passionate about growth. And so it was, okay, great. This is the conversation I really want to have. So yes, it has been inherent, but I think it's always evolving. 8 years ago, the world was very different. We had a smaller distribution base. We wanted to talk to more consumers. So we've got a larger portfolio than we did back in those days. Brands was always really critical. Portfolio became a much, more important element and portfolio strategy for us as a company over time. It's always been quite fundamental, and that's reflected in what our investors hear from us when we do things like results. It's inherent in the people that we're hiring into the business, and hopefully some of the partnerships that we see, because we want to be with other great brands and partnering. We just announced a partnership with Spartan Races, which is another fantastic brand in our space that we're very excited about. So yeah, it's definitely front and center, and I think it's my job, I suppose, to make sure that I help as many people, because every different functions, you think about the finance teams, you think about the people in the factories, you think about the people in human resources. Part of what I do really is to help them understand the impact the brand can make. And what's really wonderful in our company is everyone's really sort of committed and excited by that, so they want to hear about it. So yeah, I guess I'm fairly fortunate.
I was going to ask you actually about that, about kind of the conversations that you would be having with C-suite. There's often, and Fergus O'Carroll's done a brilliant series on kind of CMO, CFO relationship, but it can often be one that is seen to not work, because it's like if Tom Fishburne was doing a cartoon, it'd be like the CMO just wants to spend all the money, the CFO wants to save it all, which I don't think is true at all. But I just think there's kind of they speak different languages sometimes. But I'd love to understand kind of the conversations you have with C-suite around marketing and particularly brand, and what are the things they care about? What are the metrics they want to have discussions about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know it's a big topic, and I listened to the Tim and Johnny from Heineken USA on Fergus. A brilliant conversation, and I encourage everyone to have a listen to that as well if you can. But yeah, I think what's really interesting about this debate is when marketeers probably don't do a good job, it's when they go into the C-suite and say, we just got 4 billion impressions from this activation. That's not really going to be of much interest to the CEO and the CFO. How we're doing on revenue, how's our margin doing, how's our growth doing, those are the conversations. So it really is sort of the job of somebody in my role, I think, to sort of establish as much of the, what are we trying to do here? What impact is the marketing function doing on revenue growth and profit and margin, and just tying those things together in a way that's really easy to understand. Because I think any CFO, is really interested in anything that can help those numbers and those metrics look good. So it's not a difficult conversation if the marketeer can actually come in and say, hey, we're actually reaching a lot more consumers now than we've ever reached before. If we do that consistently over time, we're going to grow the amount of consumers, the penetration that the brand has got, and that will lead to growth because more consumers are there and we're engaging them and, those types of things. So I think you have to always be thinking about what's the business goals, what's the ambition, and what role is marketing playing in doing that. And, by all means, inspire a little bit with some of the great activations, but really then boil it back down to what is this doing for us?
Yeah, a balance of kind of showbiz and numbers.
We're probably in that environment more of a balance on the numbers. It shouldn't be that difficult. It's difficult sometimes to tie things up and timescales and everything, but it's not that difficult to understand what's on the agenda of the C-suite. Because for me, it's as much about revenue and growth and profit as it is about, hey, isn't this marketing doing? Isn't this marketing?
And it is a really important thing, and I think it's something that, I don't know if marketers, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but sometimes can shy away from it because they worry that they're not going to have the data or have enough data. But I get there's ways of making sure you can try to tie it all together.
Yeah, and I think what's crucial as well is that you just have conversations. Like, go and talk to the CFO. It's like, look, tell me what you want to hear. What's important to you? What are you worried about? What are you concerned about? And very quickly, you can get a real sense of, okay, this is what's on their agenda. And my CFO, Wendy, and I we talk all the time just in terms of what's critical, what's the most important thing for the next quarter, how can we work together. Our massive focus is on measurement. We're measuring 22 brand activations across the globe, across all the brands every year in a way that's consistent so that we can bring the output of what we do very simply and easily to the conversations I have with her and the rest of my team. It's very quantifiable and very specific about what we're trying to do and whether we actually get to do it or whether we actually achieve it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Johnny talked about understanding both worlds, right? You talked about what people are thinking about, what people care about. As a marketing leader, what are the things, I hate saying keep me up awake at night. I hope nothing does, but they kind of use up your kind of brain power at the moment and things you feel you need to figure out from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, from a macro level, the focus is always, is what my team, the marketing function, is it driving growth for the business? That's at a very sort of high level, that's what it is. I would say there's probably a couple of things that we're wrestling with at the moment, and I'm sure it's kind of a lot of marketeers are the same, is really the measurement, particularly as it relates to media. How do you go beyond basic reach numbers? And you had Karen on your podcast a few months ago on attention. That's a big topic for us. Not all media channels are the same. How do we make sure that we're reaching people who are actually paying attention? And how do you navigate through this enormous, intimidating minefield of data and statistics that come out of the social media platforms and the media agencies that we have? I think that's a big thing for us. Obviously, artificial intelligence is on everyone's mind. And for me, there's obviously some opportunities there, whether it be content creation, maybe media planning as well, but also how can it help us to sort of capture cultural moments? How does that work? Experiences like we talked about the Grand Prix this weekend, what role can it play there? And it's still something that we sort of debate and discuss a lot. So I think certainly measurement is definitely a big part of it, and how technology can help marketing going forward, I think is a things that we spend a lot of time talking about.
It's fascinating. I've been doing kind of some reviewing of some of the earlier episodes of That's What I Call Marketing, and 2 years ago, AI didn't come up at all. It's fascinating. It's terrifying, but also amazing how fast things can change. I guess we don't even know in 6 months' time what we'd be thinking about. It's amazing.
And that fundamentally forces us to change how we operate as well. So, I was literally having a conversation this morning that the answer to one of the questions we've got at the moment is A, and in 3 months' time, it might be B. The same question will have a very different answer to it. And, we've got to be ready for that, because otherwise you're going to be stuck doing things. So, and that, that's not an easy cultural, behavioral sort of shift to manage, but the opportunities are there. Right?
Yeah, you have to be well planned, but very flexible. One of the other things probably is, as the company gets bigger, maybe as particularly Optimum Nutrition gets bigger, with that comes more threats from new entrants to the market. The bigger you get, sometimes things can start to move more slowly. It becomes harder to navigate. How do you and the rest of the C-suite think about maintaining that number one position and that growth that you're on?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is down to sort of, we have our game that we want to play, and we feel pretty confident that that is a good game to play. So this emphasis on quality, emphasis on the product, partnerships with these elite athletes in Optimum's world. These things are fairly fundamental, and we're also aware that there's lots of different sort of ways to get to talk to consumers now, social media platforms emerging, all these kind of things. So those are the areas that are expanding and growing for us. But yeah, I think we have to do two things. We have to keep a real eye on competition and the category and what's happening, what's changing, what's different, but also stick to the consistent things that have got us to grow over time. Because, I think if you start to change and shift around too quickly, consumers very quickly get sort of confused and kind of, hang on a minute, I thought that brand stood for that and it doesn't, and what they're doing. So, that bit is fairly critical for us.
So kind of a light look over the shoulder at what's going on, but not obsessing too much about any new entrants or competitors in the market. Kind of respectfully aware.
Oh, we're very aware and we're very conscious of it. And, in many ways, we sort of understand what's working for them and what isn't working for them. I think that it's constantly changing. When you're in a category that's growing, you get a lot of people coming in. But yeah, we're very focused on what we do and what others do as well.
We're near time, but I did want to just kind of ask you, as you think about, maybe it's people on your team or bringing people into your team or just people kind of entering the world of marketing, what do you think kind of the important skills and maybe even behaviors that you look for?
I guess I speak a little bit from my own experience. I still look back and think that my time in sales was fundamental, because you got to learn and understand the real world. So I'd encourage anyone who's thinking about a career in marketing to get as much exposure to different functions as they can, whether that be sales, finance, supply is a great one to get involved in, human resources. So I remember 2 or 3 quotes sort of landed with me in my life. And one of them was the very last thing my marketing professor said at my university before we went for our final exam. He says, all you marketeers in this room, remember, it's sales that drives the revenue and marketing that spends it. And it landed with me, and it was kind of a humbling moment. We all trooped off thinking we were, the world beaters, and then we realized actually we have a role to play, which is to spend the money effectively and realize that someone else has actually earned it. So those are the sorts of things I think are really important. So I think that's one thing, get as much exposure to different people and different functions as you can. I think the other thing that I find is that the marketeers that I most respect are the ones that just listen really hard. They listen to other people, they listen to consumers, they listen to other functions. They really seek to sort of understand what's on other people's. And so I really encourage people to sort of take that with them, because it's certainly, I know when I do that, I'm a better marketeer. When I don't do that, I'm not as effective.
Yeah, and again, it comes up so often, the concept of curiosity, and that to me is really what that is about, being curious to want to know what you don't know.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's been fantastic the last few years. And Connor, you do a great job with it as well, just bringing learning and real life examples to the fore. When I started out, you didn't have access to all of the learning, all the great brands and case studies that are available now. I mean, there's so many of them, and not all of them are a blueprint for growth and success on everything, but you can take ideas and snippets and little things that people have done on different brands and use them to your advantage. So I think that's really critical, to stay really up to date on the latest learning, because we're in a bit of a golden age of effectiveness. We know a lot more now than we've known historically. So that's key as well. Just keep really up to date and immerse yourself in great stories and great successes. Yeah,
no, definitely. And as you say, there's access to lots of great content out there. Like I'd be a huge fan of the likes of Work, and, I think they're phenomenal. But there's loads of places to get the information and just kind of figure out the bits that work for you, because it's different. Like, it depends on your category, your situation, your growth, your B2B, B2C, whatever it is. Colin, listen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really thrilled to have you on, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Connor. Thanks so much. And it's been a great opportunity to sort of share some conversations and talk a little bit about Optimum.
Yeah.
And it's been fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the chance.
Thanks a million. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I was fascinated to hear this story. I'm aware of the work of Glanbia. I know a few people that work in Glanbia. I'm aware of it from kind of the dairy sector as well, the work they do there. And it's a phenomenal story. And I think, you'll know a lot of the consumer brands that you may not know the corporate brand, but it's a phenomenal success story. It's great that Colin was able to share that with us today with so many insights. And again, for me, hearing the approach Colin and the organization takes to, that global marketing, they're in so many different countries and, the challenges that come with that, but how they approach it. And again, as I said before, that's something that Diplomat has been set up to help organizations with, because it really is something that, you can benefit from learning from others that have done it before. And so if you're a global brand entering new markets, certainly check out diplomat.agency. Well, look, that's it for today's episode. Definitely get in touch with us if you are interested in partnering. And again, as I said at the start of every show, if you've enjoyed today's show, help us by reaching more people by just sharing it, liking, subscribing, and encouraging others to listen to That's What I Call Marketing. And we will see you next week for the third part in our series with Legacy Communications.
Thanks to the Indie List for sponsoring today's show. Visit theindylist.ie to find out more.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Are you facing the maze of global expansion? Diplomat introduces the diplomacy model, a cost-effective, innovative approach to navigating the complexities of your brand's presence in international markets. Visit diplomat.agency